I asked my employer to pay me in Bitcoin. I thought it was a simple question. It wasn't. And what it uncovered was something I hadn't thought through at all. I'm Sats, and the conversation that followed went in directions I didn't expect. Let me tell you what prompted it. Because the context matters. I had been holding Bitcoin for about 2 years at that point. I believed in the long-term case. I was buying regularly through dollar cost averaging. And at some point, the thought occurred to me that if I genuinely believed Bitcoin was a better store of value than dollars, why was I converting dollars into Bitcoin after tax when I could potentially receive some of my income in Bitcoin directly and simplify the process? That logic felt sound to me, so I asked. My employer is not a large corporation. I work for a smaller company where these kinds of conversations are at least possible. I went to my manager and said I had a question about my compensation and whether there was any flexibility in how part of it was structured. They said they were open to hearing it. I said I was interested in receiving a portion of my salary in Bitcoin rather than dollars, and I wanted to understand whether that was something they could accommodate. The first response was not what I expected. They did not say no immediately. They said they would need to look into whether it was legally straightforward, which told me they were taking it seriously, but also that nobody in the room had the answer. The conversation that followed over the next 2 weeks was more educational than I anticipated, and this is where it got more complicated than I expected. Here is what I learned. In the United States, employers can pay employees in alternative forms of compensation, but there are specific rules around it. The Fair Labor Standards Act requires that employees receive at least minimum wage in US dollars for the hours they work. Beyond that baseline, additional compensation can take other forms, including Bitcoin, as long as both parties agree in writing and the arrangement is properly documented. The tax question is the complicated one, and this is where I had not done enough thinking before I asked. Bitcoin received as compensation is taxed as ordinary income at the fair market value on the day it is received. That means if I receive Bitcoin worth $5,000, I owe income tax on $5,000 exactly as if I had received $5,000 in cash. The fact that it is Bitcoin does not reduce the tax liability. It also creates a cost basis for capital gains purposes. If I later sell that Bitcoin for more than I received it for, I owe capital gains tax on the difference. My employer needed to withhold payroll taxes on the dollar value of any Bitcoin they paid me. That meant they would need to either withhold from the dollar portion of my salary or have me pay the withholding separately. Neither was complicated exactly, but it required process changes that their payroll provider did not have a standard workflow for. We went back and forth on this for about 2 weeks. My manager was genuinely interested in making it work. Their payroll team was less enthusiastic. Not hostile, just not set up for it. Here is what we eventually agreed on. They wouldn't pay me in Bitcoin, not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't make it work. Instead, they agreed to pay me a bonus, denominated in dollars, with the explicit understanding on my side that I would use it to buy Bitcoin. Which is, legally speaking, just a dollar bonus. But it reflected the spirit of what I was asking for, and it removed the payroll complexity on their end. It is not the same as being paid in Bitcoin, but it was what was practically achievable. Here's what I think about that outcome now. The conversation itself was worth more than the arrangement we landed on. It forced me to understand things I should have understood already. The tax treatment of Bitcoin as compensation, the legal framework around alternative compensation in the US, the practical limitations of payroll systems that were not built for digital assets. I had been thinking about Bitcoin as an investment. That conversation started to make me think about it as something that could interact with the rest of my financial life in ways I had not fully considered. How do you handle Bitcoin when it's income rather than an investment? How do you plan for the tax liability when the value can move significantly between when you receive it and when you file? These are not hypothetical questions. They are practical ones that more people will face as Bitcoin becomes more integrated into how people are compensated. I also learned that the conversation is worth having, even if the outcome is not exactly what you hoped for. Most employers are not going to say yes immediately. Most payroll systems are not set up for it. But the conversation is possible in a way that most people assume it is not. The boss did not laugh. They did not dismiss it. They took it seriously, looked into it, and found a way to approximate what I was asking for. That is more than I expected when I walked into the room. Let's bring it together. I asked my employer to pay part of my salary in Bitcoin. The conversation took 2 weeks and went in directions I had not anticipated. Bitcoin received as compensation is taxed as ordinary income at the fair market value on the day you receive it. The tax treatment is not simpler than cash. In some ways, it is more complex. US employers can pay additional compensation in Bitcoin beyond the minimum wage requirement in dollars, but It requires documentation and creates payroll complexity that most systems are not set up for. The outcome for me was a dollar bonus rather than direct Bitcoin payment. Not the same thing, but practically achievable. The conversation is worth having. Most employers will take it more seriously than you expect. If you are thinking about how Bitcoin fits into your broader financial life, beyond just holding it, the video on why Bitcoin has value covers the foundation that makes these conversations possible to have confidently. Watch that next. Stack smart, stay curious. See you in the next stack.